Hi, everyone. My name is Ryland Adzich, and welcome back to the Bookworm Global Author Interview YouTube channel. I'm here with Marianne Richmond, and just going to introduce ourselves.
Hi, everybody. I am Marianne Richmond, and I am coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee this morning. And I have lived here, I guess this summer will be 6 years. So I am a longtime children's book author and illustrator. I have been writing, oh my gosh, a long time, probably 25 years or so. I think I've written about 60 or 70 books to date and have sold about 7 million copies of all my different books through the years. So yeah, it's been a long time, really satisfying career.
I'd like to jump in with this interview and talk about your early life. And I want to start it off where did you grow up when you were younger, and how did this environment impact you?
Yes. Okay. So I grew up in a suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It was called Greendale, and it was a smallish town. Well, 30,000 people, maybe that isn't so small, but I moved there when I was 2 years old, and it is really the only house I knew until I left for college, at 18 years old. And I was one of three kids. I was the only girl after two brothers, which meant that I spent a lot of time by myself because my brothers were 2 and 3 years older than me, and they were buddies. And so they were always off doing things. And I was the lone girl. And so I spent a lot of time in my imagination. I mean, I can think of just being a kid and making up games. Like I would pretend I was a teacher and, I would have a whole imaginary classroom. And I had an aunt, my mom's sister, who was a school teacher. She lived in Philadelphia, and she would mail me all her old school supplies. And I thought that was just amazing. But in fourth grade, so when I was 9 years old, I started having a lot of health issues. I started having seizures quite unexpectedly. And so that really furthered my sense of isolation, where I was afraid to go to school. And I think it just made me go into myself a lot, where I did find solace in creativity and writing and just kind of making things, whether they were made up activities or made up stories. I just found my imagination a safer place to be.
When you were talking about the creativity that you felt was kind of helped you cope through different things and was something that you found a lot of solace in, when did you start realizing, okay, being a writer is something that I really, really want to do with my life?
Oh gosh, that did not happen for a while. I mean, I can point back to being, like third grade, fifth grade, doing the creative writing assignments in school and loved those. I still have stuff in my file drawers that I made when I was 9 and 10 years old, and with the table of contents and the illustrations and stuff. And when I would get feedback from a teacher to say, you did a great job or whatever, that was so heartening to me. Like I was more thrilled by comments on my writing, probably more than anything. So there was an early spark of I like to do this, but I would say as far as thinking it would be a living, that took a long time. I was in my mid 20s, so I was about 25 years old when I actually underwent brain surgery for a benign brain tumor that had been the cause of all those early seizures. But it took a really long time for doctors to figure out what was wrong with me. And on the back end of my recovery, I actually felt fine. I just needed to stay out of work for a couple months. And so I started writing, I started creating thank you cards for all these people who had given me things during surgery. And a friend of mine started selling my little creations to some shops around town. And so that was the very beginnings of this little enterprise I created around my creativity. And then the next thing I did after making cards was I wrote my very, very, very first book. And it was called The Gift of an Angel. And it was a story of how God picks out an angel for every new child on earth and sends the angel, down to earth with her instructions of how to be a good angel. And it
That's
was just,
beautiful.
yeah, it was just this made up story. And for me, it was really a metaphor for all the people who I had felt had come alongside me during my issues. And I self published that book long before self publishing was a really common way, to get your work in the world. I didn't know what I was doing. I remember taking my drawings to a printer and trying to figure out how to, make it into pages. And then I went to a bindery and they were the ones who put the hardcover on. And I got, a couple thousand of these delivered to my garage. So there was no print on demand, none of that stuff. And I started selling this one book to the little shops that were carrying my cards. So it was like, oh, you have my cards? Now I wrote a book. And that is how I started selling. And then one book became two, and two became three, and three became many, many, many. Yeah.
In regards to your writing, especially from the story you were sharing, I was reading a bit about you, and I understand that your brain tumor went undiagnosed for 15 years. So, and then becoming a writer, how did that experience in your life solidify that you wanted to become a writer and kind of change your career path?
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot packed in there. I think growing up, there was a lot of layers to my health journey. I mean, one was just um, being misdiagnosed for so long. So I started having these seizures at age 9. I went to a lot of doctors. They, well, several of them told me I was making it up and that I was using this for attention, which as a 9-year-old is really, really traumatic because obviously I know in my body I'm not making this up. And why would I put myself through something so frightening to get attention? I think I could come up with some easier ways to do that. So there was this big narrative around disbelieving me, like no one believing what I had to say. And then layered on that, I had a mother who just really was not, what can I say, like emotionally available because of her own stuff that kind of preceded me coming into the world. I mean, now too, that feels like a bit of a buzzword around generational trauma and things like that. I didn't have words for that, but my mom had suffered also before I was born with depression, and she went through electroshock therapy when she was in the military before she got married. And so that really made her very anti medical community, very anti intervention, very anti medication. And so she did not allow me to take anything for these seizures. And so what happened is I just started to internalize a pretty low self esteem and pretty low self worth, that I felt like no one was looking out for me. No one was protecting me. No one was taking care of me. And so when I started writing, and like that very first book, The Gift of an Angel, there were eventually people who came alongside me, but that was a way for me to give voice to my own experiences. And I think that's really what I've continued to do, because a lot of that childhood stuff lives pretty deep and lives for a long time. And so as I started having my own kids, I did not want them to have the same experience that I did growing up, feeling unsupported and, yeah, just disbelieved. And so really very much the hallmark of my work is building. Someone described my writing as giving that I write the language of attachment. And I really loved that descriptor because I think that is exactly what it is. It's building love and trust and encouragement between a caregiver and a child, to let them know they do matter, they are valued, they are protected and taken care of.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing this part
Yeah.
of your story, especially because in a time when mental health is a really big thing amongst youth and people are coming out and sharing their stories, it's
Yeah.
very inspirational to hear how you were able to translate the pain, but the eventual ability to write and to have a medical experience that in the beginning did not go well at all, but then now you're here and you're able to share your beautiful work with the world. So I
Oh,
was
thank you.
wondering, how do you draw inspiration for your characters? Who or what is some of the inspiration for your characters?
Yeah, and yeah, okay, so I feel like there's two kinds of children's books in the world, and one is more of an emotion sharing type of book, and then I think of that other one is more of a story with characters and the arc of a story. And I would say the bulk of my work has been around emotion sharing. I do have a few books that have more of a character, like I have an adoption book that's a conversation between Barley Bear and his mom. And so that's a little more character driven. But a lot of my books, like, Be Brave Little One, it's more of an emotion sharing experience. But in answer to your question of where do I derive inspiration, I would say it's by listening for universal themes in life. I tend to pay attention to what I hear a lot of people saying. Um, like there's a equation in the writing world. It was started by a memoir coach that she said, this is a story of X as told through Y, and the X is the universal emotion and the Y is your personal story. So it could be, this is a story of forgiveness as told through my journey with epilepsy, and that X is the universal emotion. And so I've really tried to focus most of my work on the X, whether those themes are around love, courage, celebrating individuality. I have a book for adoption. I have a book for loss. And so I really try to take a look at all these emotional high and low points of life and try to give voice to the experience around those in a way that someone reading my work would feel very seen and heard in their experience.
When you're writing your children's books, especially, and you're dealing with topics like adoption or courage, how do you convey that so that a young child can best understand it?
That's a good question. Sometimes I talk to my own kids actually, and get their take on it. For the adoption book, I sat with a lot of adoptive families and just asked them to describe for me, what that experience was like, what were the high points, what were the low points. Um, and then you just start to hear the same things repeated. With that example, everyone talks about waiting, and lots of paperwork, and then feeling like the child that they end up bringing into their family, they feel like it was the child was handpicked for them. Like there's just this sense of meant to be, even after such a long wait.
Right.
So I try to listen for that universality. As far as the language, that is actually the work with my editor as well. Like I may write a story and then she will give me feedback to say, okay, I think we need to simplify the language a bit. I think you need to find a word for, I'm just going to pull something, a serendipity. Let's just take the word. And maybe, bring that down to a little younger audience. But that said, a lot of parents like reading books to their kids, even picture books that have some words in there that feel like a little bit of a stretch, so that they can say, oh, serendipity, that means, luck, or that they can almost use that as a vocabulary lesson a little bit too.
Right.
But yeah, it's a little bit of trial and error too, of reading something to a group and they're staring at you. I have no idea what you just said. That might be a clue. Yeah.
So when you're writing your children's books and all of the books that you've been able to write, what's the writing process like for you? After you hear the stories, do you just start writing or does it take a couple of weeks to think about it?
Oh gosh, all kinds of things. I mean, sometimes a title will find me before anything. For example, I have one book, and it's probably my book that has sold the most copies, and it's called If I Could Keep You Little. And the story is, if I could keep you little, I would, hold your hand everywhere. But then I miss you knowing I can go, you stay there. And so it's like the push and pull of parenthood. Now, that was an example where when my youngest son, I have 4 children myself, when he was just 6, and he's 19 now. So when he was 6, I think we were clothes shopping for school. And, he put on a pair of pants that used to fit him, and they were up to his calves now. And I remember putting my hand on his head, and I was like, oh, if I could just keep you little, keep you little. And in that moment, I was like, oh, wow, that is a title. Like, I just knew that was my book title. And so in that case, I wrote to a title, if you will. Like, it almost went backwards. But other times, if I have, well, I'll use like a real life example. So I have a new book coming out next spring, and it's called The World is Awaiting You. And that idea started with this idea that, especially now, I feel like our world is so loud and so information overload that it's easy to feel really, in some ways, disempowered. Like, how can I make a difference?
Yeah.
Because there's just so much. And so I was pondering that idea, and I thought, well, okay, if we all do little things, it can add up to big things. So case in point, exactly what you're doing. And so I started to think about our body parts. Like, what can I do with just my hands? And what can I do with my feet? And what can I do with my brain? And what can I do with my voice? And so that's how that brainstorming started. And so I just took hands, and I thought, well, what are all the things I can do with my hands? I can wave and say hello. I can make something. I can take care of somebody. I can bring somebody something. And so that's how that started, was just brainstorming through all the body parts and all the things you can do with them. And then started to kind of carve that into a story. So I think that stanza ended up to be, the world is awaiting your hands to wave and make and mend. Look for a need, do a good deed. What kindness can you lend? So I just started taking them and putting them into phrases.
That's so whimsical how you can do that. And the way you remember then, even in some of your other books, how you were explaining, if I could keep you little, just
Yeah.
remember the lines, and they're just beautiful pieces.
Thank you.
What is the biggest inspiration for your writing as a whole?
The life. I think my own journey, I was just talking about this with someone the other day, because a common question coming my way is, oh, do you think you'll write chapter books? Like, now that your kids are older, do you think you're going to write chapter books, or maybe, fiction, or like just write different kinds of books? Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's as much my path as how will I give voice to life in the future? For a long time, it's been through my art and my books, as my own family grew and my personal journey was healing,
Right.
from stuff from way back. So many of my books are messages back to myself. You take Be Brave, Little One, and that is a book about how courage shows up in all different ways. How far will I go? What things can I be when I get to choose what brave is to me? And I want kids to understand brave can be saying a quiet no, or making a decision that people might question. Like, if it's coming from an authentic place, that's courage. And I think sometimes we think courage has to be some out loud, big, climb the mountain or go skydiving kind of thing. And it's really just creating a relationship with your heart and knowing what that sounds like and feels like. And that was my experience for so long, of being kind of whipsawed by all these people who were supposed to know so much. And it really, I was the one who ultimately chose brain surgery for myself, as a 25-year-old kid. And I don't know, that was courage, of doing things that I felt right about, that maybe wasn't a popular decision. So for me, it's really giving voice to my own life path and realizing that I share a lot of emotions. Just because grief, I know grief.
Right.
Sadness, I know sadness. And so our stories are different, but our feelings are a lot the same.
Mhm.
I'm actually in grad school right now for mental health counseling. And that's how I know Nicole, who I know you interviewed. And so, that might change my path. And maybe creativity is intersecting mental health during a future chapter.
Right.
So I'm just kind of paying attention to what I feel drawn to coming alongside, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. And I really like, again, tying it back to the idea of you're using Y to explain X. All of your endeavors and what you've done are kind of a vessel for a child to understand these concepts that traditionally can sometimes pass them over. And that's a perfect segue. That's a
Yeah, you got it.
Thank you so much because well, I got it because you explained it so well. I'm just
Yeah,
drawing off of the ideas that you've got me thinking about.
good.
So that's a perfect segue into kind of the section about your future. And so it's kind of a maybe a traditional question, but
Yeah.
if you could explain where do you see your writing career in 5 years, 10 years? You'd mentioned about potentially chapter books, but continuing on this creative writing path, especially with your children's books.
Yeah, that is a great question. I would love to release a memoir. That is a bit of a dream of mine, to give voice to the story behind all the stories, and just, yeah, what was my inspiration to creating this career of a children's book author. So I hope that in the next 5 years that is out in the world. Um, as far as writing, I don't know what kind of books I'm going to be writing. I don't see myself writing young adult or that kind, or like chapter books. Like that just doesn't feel like a direction I'm going to go. I
Mhm.
think it's going to be more around using my mental health counseling education, um, to maybe come alongside other people who are trying to reauthor their own personal narratives. I've been learning a lot about, there is such a thing called narrative therapy, believe it or not. And the line I like to use around that is how the stories we're born into shape the ones we tell ourselves. And so, depending on our upbringing, depending on our generational um, ancestry, we come into this world believing certain things about ourselves and our capabilities and our future. And sometimes it's as simple and hard as telling ourselves a different story. And so I have a lot of interest in that whole topic.
Right.
Yeah. Um,
Congratulations, by the way,
oh,
on
thank you.
going to grad school for this. This is something that, again, as mental health becomes bigger and bigger and people are more open to talk about it, we need people who have education and experience in that to give us advice because sometimes people may be giving advice which could be valuable, but they lack the training to really back up what they're saying. So having that training, I think,
Yes.
is paramount to really being able to connect to people. And I would be honored to read your memoir. That would be great. I would read it.
Thank you. Well, I think you mentioned the word advice, and I'm laughing because that is the one thing a counselor isn't supposed to do. And
Oh,
well, no, because my whole kind of career has been based on problem solving and brainstorming and idea generation.
right.
And yet, my biggest role as a counselor should be holding up a mirror so that you say, oh, this is what I need to do, or
Yes. Okay.
listening and reflecting back, you sound confused. And then you say, I am so confused. Yeah. So it's so interesting. I've been learning that it's almost the opposite of what I thought it was. That
That's
some, yes, yeah. That's one of my biggest learnings is this is not what I thought it was.
so from the class and once you finish it, do you think that some of what you've learned about you could potentially see this potentially in a book? You're like, oh, this topic, I could go deeper into this potentially in a children's book.
I do. I really do. And to your point earlier, you said, how do you make it accessible? How do you make big concepts accessible. I mean, I know that a couple authors are starting to give voice to it. Like I just saw a book about consent, bodily consent,
Right.
which is a big one of, oh, why do I have to hug you just because we're related?
Right.
Things like that. Like I'm hearing things coming around that.
Mhm.
Mindfulness has become such a buzzword right now that sometimes I wonder if we even really know what the meaning of this. It's become just everywhere, but what is it really?
Right.
Anxiety, of course, is a huge topic, and that's talked about a lot in children's books. So it really is looking at that vast amount of content that's out there. And I mean, that's a question I'm asking myself all the time too, is what can I offer that is different or that it hasn't been said? And sometimes it does feel like a lot's been said already.
Interesting. But I like the approach you take, especially with using your own experiences and then writing from that place. And I also like how you kind of write it in the prose and rhyming it, because then kids are more likely to
Yes.
remember it because it's easier to say. And my last question about kind of your future is, what are two things your journey as an author has taught you about yourself and the world around you?
Ooh,
Kind of a big question. So if you just have like one thing or three things, but just kind of, things that have made an impact on your life where you think, okay, I learned something about myself, but I also learned something about this great big world that we live in.
yeah. Well, I think one of them is what I touched on before of our stories are different and our feelings are a lot the same.
Mhm.
Um, because I think we can feel really isolated in our experiences sometimes. And when you start to, like, I've done so many presentations for moms groups and kids and teachers, and when you start to really connect, you realize we're all sharing the same emotions, even though the situations that brought them about are unique. So I'd say that's one big learning. Um, what did I learn about myself? That I seem to be able to take, I think I have a knack for just taking big ideas, big concepts, and whittling them down into a really succinct, um, manageable size, so that it's like it's like a bite-sized way to understand empathy or courage or love or um, I have a book called Hooray For You, which is a celebration of you-ness, which just puts into, again, like 32 pages, um, why we love the people we do. It's just the grand sum of them that sets them apart, their body and brains plus their spirit and heart. Yeah. And
Again, beautiful lines. It's beautiful.
I'm just a big fan of personal connection. I'm a little sad that everything is so through the screen.
Mm.
Um, I just feel like we're becoming kind of a isolated, lonely society. And I think COVID has given I mean, obviously COVID was sent people into their homes, but I think some people are a little reluctant to come back out because
Yes,
it's easier just not to deal with
people.
conversation. And yeah, but gosh, I get so much joy out of connecting with people face to face and in person.
Me too, but I am glad I get to interview you over
Yes,
Zoom, but I wish I could be there in person because
well,
it's so
and
cool.
I mean, and yeah, exactly. And the thing that is the beauty that I think pre-COVID we wouldn't have maybe been using technology the way we are, where
Right.
you're way over there and I'm here and we can have this beautiful conversation. So for that, I am thankful.
But it's just what is the cost? We have these things, but then what are we giving up too? And that's a sense of connecting with others on that personal level, especially as a child, which is something that children really need to solidify development skills.
Oh, 100%. And like what your organization is doing, I mean, you are just putting the world in these kids' hands. Just wow, there's so much out there that I can dream about that they didn't even know existed before. So
Thank
you're you're part of it, in such a beautiful way.
We're going to go into a fun section where I like to ask about you and your hobbies. And I'd like to start this off. I ask everyone this because I like to get the different answers. If you were an ice cream flavor, what flavor would you be?
Oh gosh. I think it would be like coffee flavored ice cream with probably dark chocolate
That
chunks in there.
sounds so good. I love coffee flavored ice cream. Oh my God.
Why? Yeah.
It's the best. Do you have
Yeah.
a good ice cream place near you that you like to go to?
Yes, we do. It's called Jenny's Ice Cream in Nashville here. And it's like a woman-owned business. Yeah, she's got locations everywhere now. So I like that one.
I have to see if she's got one here because I'm a big ice cream connoisseur. We have one here in California called Salt
Yeah.
and Straw,
Oh,
and
I've been there. I lived in California for 3 years.
their ice cream is pretty
Amazing.
good.
Yeah, well, and of course, there I loved Marianne's.
Yep.
Yeah, of course.
So we
So,
had Marianne's and we were in Santa Cruz a little while ago, and there's also the Penny Ice Creamery.
oh, I don't know that one.
So
Okay.
that one is they do something called their traditional marshmallow fluff, and they put whipped marshmallow on top of your ice cream, and then they blowtorch it for you on the ice cream.
Oh,
That's really good.
yeah, you're making me want to get back for a visit. It's so pretty there.
It's beautiful. I've never been to Tennessee, but I've
Mm.
heard that it is very, very breathtaking.
It's pretty. It's very, very, very green, which I appreciate, but I miss the water. So it's hard to
Yeah,
get everything in one place.
that's true. That's true. How far are you from the closest water source beach? Where would be the
Oh gosh. I mean, we have a big lake here, but if you're going to get to the ocean, that would be 7 hours south. You'd go through like Alabama, and then you'd hit the panhandle of Florida. And
okay,
there's gorgeous beaches down there. And I mean, 7 hours is far, but it's not horrible. You can
right.
leave in the morning and you're there by dinner. So it's not too bad.
It's kind of like going to Los Angeles from the Bay Area.
Really. Exactly.
So, do you have any pets? If so, what kind?
We do. We have one dog, and his name is Otis.
Oh,
And yeah, he is kind of looks like a border collie, but he's not a purebred border collie. He's 11. His eyebrows are getting gray, and he and I
oh,
share a birthday. Mhm.
oh, what's your birthday?
July 21st. So in fact, it's in 11 days.
Happy early
Both,
birthday.
both Otis and I will be turning a year older, and he's a lot younger than me.
Uh, well, that is very cool. And it's cool that you share a birthday with your pet.
No, it's
I wish I shared a birthday with my dog.
yeah, kind of fun. It's kind of coincidental, actually.
Wow. So when you say coincidental, how did you get Otis on that?
Oh, you know what? We bought him from a farm in Minnesota because I lived in Minnesota as well before California. And he was just in a little like pen on this farm. It was like puppies for sale kind of thing. And yeah, we just plucked him out of that. Yeah, and so it was the woman, who was selling the puppies. She had his records that said his birthday because I think we got him at 3 months old.
That is
Yeah,
that's a storybook right there. How you met Otis. That is so cute.
we do have a working title for that book that who knows if it'll ever come out, but it's called The Dog My Dad Never Wanted, which is Otis because he didn't want the dog, and now the dog's favorite person is the dad.
That's usually how it goes with the dogs,
Exactly.
from what I've seen.
Yeah.
So, if you could travel to any place in the world, where would you go and why?
Oh gosh, I would go to Africa and go on a safari. That has been on my bucket list for so long. And I just am so enamored with seeing animals in their natural habitat. I mean, I can get excited at a zoo, and to imagine seeing giraffes and zebras in their natural habitat is just so thrilling to me. So that would be my dream.
I share the same dream as you. I think that being there and seeing the beautiful landscape and also the
Yeah.
beautiful cultures and the various tribes. There's over, I think I want to say there's over, I know there's probably over 100 different languages that are spoken, just
Oh my
the
gosh.
breadth of culture.
Wow. Yes. So now that my kids are finally older and getting more independent, hopefully I can make that one.
I think that that would be a very good trip,
Yeah.
potentially inspiration for
Yeah.
animal. That's, I agree. I totally 100% agree with that. Do you have a favorite movie? If so, why?
Favorite movie? Gosh, I am not a big movie watcher, believe it or not. I much prefer books to TV. Um, but I'm really drawn, no shock, to true stories and documentaries. Like I just watched the Michael J. Fox documentary on Friday. Oh my gosh, like total inspiration. Just of how he is dealing with Parkinson's and using it for good. And I just love movies that are based on true stories, both hard and happy. Like I'm kind of fascinated by that.
I love that. My mom likes documentaries as well.
Yeah.
I personally, I try to get into the documentaries, but then I see a TV show that's like a fantasy type where it's got like these different worlds and these different cool characters, and I think, well, maybe I should watch this one instead.
Yeah.
But documentaries, I like the ones I'm right there with you.
Yeah. And I like dramas and oh, I like stories that show a different time period.
Okay,
Like
yes,
I watched the Radium Girls, which was all about these women who used to work on the watches back in factories, and they had um, they were poisoning themselves with radium,
right.
working in the factories. And that was set in what, 19, I don't know, 20s or something like that. So I love those movies that really depict a time that we won't know about unless we learn about it.
That's beautiful. And that's something that I think a lot of people sometimes may miss in a documentary that, we never have this experience to learn about
Right.
it. So the
Exactly.
TV kind of brings these shows, bring it to us.
Yeah, I agree.
And as a last question, you're an author, so I felt that this was very fitting to end with. Do you have
Yes.
a favorite book? If so, why?
A favorite book. Gosh, I'm so predictable in that, of course, I like reading true stories as well. I almost feel like, that phrase about truth is stranger than fiction. Um, I think that. Like, why am I reading fiction when there's just these amazing true stories out there? I love The Glass Castle, which was written by Jeanette Walls. I just like her writing. I just read another one called Between Two Kingdoms that was by a woman. Um, yeah, so I kind of like memoir. I like um, sometimes I like fiction if I'm going on vacation, just a quick beach read type thing.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know if I have a favorite, but definitely some memorable ones.
Thank you so much for sharing all of
Yeah.
your amazing stories, your experiences, your favorite things, what ice cream flavor you would be.
Yes.
I'd like to end this kind of, if you have any lasting pieces of advice or anything you'd like to say to listeners, then please feel free to kind of share a lasting thought with everyone.
Oh gosh, I'm so in love with words and the power of words and how we can use words. Um, we have you can string them together and give them the power to, advocate for something or encourage somebody or express gratitude. And I just want to encourage people to write and to use their voice through the written word, even if it's just mailing a card across town or writing a poem or sharing a story. Like my dad left me some of his writings in, that he kept. And now that's such a tangible link to him, even though he's not here. So I'm just such a big fan of the legacy of writing
Mhm.
that we can share with one another. So that would be my encouragement, is to give it a little bit of time and attention in your own life.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for your
Welcome.
time.